Good evening, class. Today we will be continuing our discussion over the unit circle. Last time we got together, we went over how the unit circle correlates to the trigonometric functions such as sine and cosine. We know that on the unit circle we have our coordinate points represented by the ordered pairs on the outside of the circle, and the angle measures are represented inside the circle along the radius. That would be our pi over 6, our pi over 4, the 60 degrees, the 90 degrees, Um, just as a refresher though, let's go over what the ordered pairs mean again. So our cosine of is theta is the angle measure. So for instance, cosine of 30, cosine is represented by the x coordinate. Okay, so that's our first coordinate of the ordered pair. So for instance, cosine of pi over 6 or cosine of 30 degrees is equal to the square root of 3 over 2. Okay. Whereas sine of theta is represented by the y value or the y coordinate. For instance, sine of 90 degrees or sine of pi over 2, which is the positive y-axis going vertical straight up, that is equal to 1. Also, remember from last time that the coordinates are represented by the square root of a value on the inside all over 2. So you see how we have values such as square root of 3 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, 1/2. Well, the square root of 1, right, is just 1. So that's why we have just 1 over 2. And then we can represent 1 as being equal to the square root of 4 over 2. And then 0, of course, is just the square root of 0 over 2. Okay. Now, the negative values come into play when we cross into the negative x-axis and the negative y-axis. So remember how cosine theta correlates to the x value of the ordered pair? Well, when we go to the negative, so the left hemisphere, from pi over 2 to 3 pi over 2, or 90 degrees to 270 degrees, all of those x values, all those cosine theta values are now negative. Okay. Whereas for sine theta, when we go from pi to 0, or from 180 degrees to 0 degrees, all below the x-axis, those values, those sine theta values are all negative now. Okay. And today we will be going over how to recreate the unit circle using our hands. That way we don't have to memorize the unit circle and cloud our mind with more information than we really need. So starting out for today, we will just be going over how to recreate the first quadrant. Okay. If you're right-handed, like I am, you will be using your left hand. You'll place it flat down wherever you're going to use it. I'm going to hold my left hand like this, so it'll look weird, but from my perspective, it looks right. If you're left-handed, you would hold your right hand with your palm facing towards you. Okay. So again, it looks weird because it's facing me, but it's the correct position. So again, since I'm right-handed, I'll be using my left hand. So my left hand, my palm is facing down. Okay. And here, we can kind of imagine the first quadrant, right? That 0 degrees, that 0 radians, to that 90 degrees, that pi over 2 radians, right? We can imagine that first quadrant as our hand, right? And so here, our thumb, the horizontal, kind of represents the x-axis, right? Whereas our pinky, even though it's not the straightest, right, that's kind of our y-axis, right? And so the other 3 fingers in between the thumb and the pinky, these represent our radians or our degrees that we use. The 30, the 45, and the 60 degrees, or the pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3, respectively, radians, right? And so that way we can figure out which point we have. Okay. Now let's say we want to figure out what excuse me, cosine of pi over 6 is using this information. Or no, excuse me, pi over 3, cosine of pi over 3, right? No, cosine pi over 6. Well, then we would just have to put down our index finger, like so. Again, it looks weird because my hand's facing y'all, but I promise you it looks just like on the representation. And so what happens is we now count the fingers on both sides of the bent finger. So on the left side we have 1, 2, 3 fingers still up. On the right we have just that one, the thumb. And so we represent this in terms of like an ordered pair. So we have, think of the outside of your hand over here as a parentheses, and the parentheses over here. And so we have 3 fingers right here, so this is a 3 in the x coordinate, comma, the comma is your bent finger, 1, just the thumb, right? So our ordered pair is 3, 1. Okay. Now what this helps us with is we can now utilize that 3, the x coordinate, right? Because cosine of theta is represented by the x coordinate. We can now plug that 3 underneath the square root of something over 2 to give us cosine of pi over 6. So when we plug 3 in under that square root, we get cosine of pi over 6 is equal to square root of 3 over 2, which, if we refer back to the first quadrant, is correct, right? Now, if we want to try sine of pi over 6, we can also do that. So we have the square root of 1 over 2, which if you recall from earlier, is just 1 over 2. So we see that sine of pi over 6 is equal to 1 over 2. And if we check ourselves by going back, we will see that's right. And so this little trick works for anything. You can even use it for, again, something as weird as 0. So let's say we want to start at the x-axis. We fold our thumb, and so we count from the left, 1, 2, 3, 4 fingers. And then from the right, we don't have any fingers past our thumb, so we have the ordered pair 4, 0, right? So again, applying that x value related to the cosine, cosine of 0 is equal to the square root of 4 over 2. Square root of 4 is equal to 2. So we have 2 over 2, which is also equal to 1. If we check, we see that, yes, in fact, that is 1. And since we have 0 as our y value, sine of 0 is equal to the square root of 0 over 2, which is also just 0. And if we check ourselves again, we will see that we are correct. So this is a nice little trick to represent the first quadrant in terms of our hand, right? And so looking back at the first quadrant of the unit circle, we can see that this little trick helps us memorize this very first quadrant. Now, there are other methods to figure out the rest of the unit circle or to recreate the rest of the unit circle using our hands as well. But sadly, I did not have enough time to go over that with you all today. So this will be all for now. What questions do we have? If there are no questions, please get together with a partner or a group, small group, and try to recreate the first quadrant without using any hints and just using your hand and each other.